Part 1. A quiet neighborhood turns upside down. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. The neighborhood sat tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city, with rows of cozy houses surrounded by green lawns and colorful flower beds. Kids rode their bikes down the winding streets, dogs barked lazily in backyards, and neighbors exchanged pleasantries over coffee on lazy Sunday mornings. Life here was predictable until one day everything changed. At the center of this little suburban bubble was a woman who lived alone at 42 Maple Lane. She wasn't your typical homeowner. Life had thrown her some curveballs recently. After losing her job during the pandemic, she struggled to make ends meet. Her once tidy yard started looking more like an untamed jungle as weeds grew taller than the mailbox. But despite her hardships, she kept her head high and did what she could to keep things together for herself and her kids. Enter the Homeowners Association, HOA, the self-appointed guardians of order in the community. Known for their strict rules about lawn maintenance, paint colors, and even holiday decorations, the HOA had been breathing down her neck for months. They sent letters, left voicemails, and even knocked on her door, all demanding that she clean up her act or else. But or else came sooner than anyone expected. One Friday afternoon, while she was out of town visiting relatives, the HOA decided they'd had enough. Instead of waiting any longer, they took matters into their own hands. Without consulting her or even checking if it was okay, they hired a contractor to fix her property. What happened next would go down as one of the most bizarre and disastrous mistakes anyone in the neighborhood could have imagined. The work began early Monday morning. Trucks rumbled onto the street, waking up sleepy residents who peeked through their curtains to see what all the commotion was about. The crew set up shop in her backyard, armed with tools, wheelbarrows, and bags of concrete mix. Their mission? To demolish what they thought was an old, unused structure sitting behind the house, a large tank made of reinforced concrete that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. No one stopped to ask questions. No one double-checked its purpose. And certainly, no one realized the horrifying truth. That tank wasn't abandoned at all. In fact, it was far from useless. It was the primary water supply reservoir for the entire neighborhood. As the hours passed, the sound of machinery filled the air. Neighbors went about their day, oblivious to the chaos unfolding just steps away. By lunchtime, the unmistakable smell of wet cement wafted through the breeze. Children playing outside wrinkled their noses at the strange odor, but adults shrugged it off, assuming it was part of whatever project the HOA had cooking. By evening, the job seemed complete. The workers packed up their gear, leaving behind a freshly poured slab of concrete sealing off the top of the mysterious tank. Satisfied with their handiwork, they drove off without giving it another thought. Little did they know, they had just sealed the fate of the entire neighborhood. What started as a quiet Monday morning quickly spiraled into something nobody saw coming. Over the next few hours, odd things began happening around the area. Showers suddenly sputtered to a stop mid-lather. Dishwashers refused to fill with water. Faucets ran dry, spitting out nothing but air. At first, people brushed it off as a temporary glitch, maybe a burst pipe somewhere. But as night fell and the problem persisted, panic started to creep in. Nobody understood why the water had vanished overnight, or how something so essential to daily life could disappear without warning. Calls poured into the local utility company, but technicians insisted there was nothing wrong with the main lines. That's when whispers began spreading among neighbors. Something big was going on, and nobody knew exactly what or who to blame. Back at 42 Maple Lane, the homeowner still had no idea what awaited her when she returned home later that week. All she knew was that her peaceful little corner of the world was about to become the epicenter of a crisis unlike anything anyone had ever seen. By Tuesday evening, The neighborhood was buzzing with confusion and frustration. People were running around like headless chickens, trying to figure out why their taps had suddenly gone dry. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was chaos. Imagine waking up in the morning, turning on the shower only to find nothing coming out. Or standing in front of the sink, waiting for water to fill your coffee pot, but hearing nothing but silence. That's exactly what happened to nearly every household in the area at first. People thought it might be a temporary issue, a busted pipe, or maybe some scheduled maintenance they hadn't been informed about. But as hours turned into a full day without water, panic started setting in. Parents couldn't get their kids ready for school because there was no water to brush teeth or wash faces. Restaurants had to shut down because they couldn't operate without running water. Even the local gas station, convenience store ran out of bottled water within hours as desperate residents stocked up. Calls flooded into the municipal water department, but the answers weren't helpful. Technicians assured everyone that the main water lines were working fine. "There's no problem on our end," one customer service rep kept repeating over the phone. This left people scratching their heads. If the city's water supply was intact, then why weren't they getting any water? The mystery deepened. Meanwhile, back at 42 Maple Lane, things were about to get even stranger. The homeowner returned from her trip late Tuesday afternoon, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the neighborhood. She pulled into her driveway, expecting to come home to peace and quiet. Instead, she was greeted by a scene straight out of a disaster movie. Her backyard looked like a construction zone, piles of dirt, tools scattered everywhere, and a giant slab of fresh concrete covering what used to be the old tank behind her house. Her jaw dropped. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the mess, trying to process what she was seeing. Then reality hit her like a ton of bricks. "What on earth happened here?" she muttered under her breath. Furious and bewildered, she marched straight to the HOA office the next morning, demanding answers. When she confronted the HOA president, he looked visibly uncomfortable. His face turned red as he stammered through an apology. We thought it was abandoned," he finally managed to say. "Nobody told us it was still being used." He tried to explain that the HOA had assumed the tank was just an eyesore, an old structure left behind by previous owners that needed to be cleaned up. They never bothered to check its actual purpose before calling in the contractors. The homeowner could barely believe what she was hearing. "You mean to tell me you filled the entire water tank with concrete?" she exclaimed, her voice rising with disbelief. The HOA president nodded sheepishly, avoiding eye contact. It was clear he realized the gravity of the mistake, but his awkward apologies did little to ease the growing tension. Word spread quickly once the homeowner shared the shocking news with her neighbors. By Wednesday afternoon, the whole neighborhood knew what had happened. Engineers arrived to assess the damage, climbing over the hardened concrete to inspect the tank. Their findings confirmed everyone's worst fears. The reservoir, the very heart of a community's water system, was now completely clogged. There was no way to salvage it. The entire system would need to be rebuilt from scratch. As the scope of the disaster became clearer, emotions ran high. Neighbors gathered in driveways and front yards, venting their frustrations. Some were angry, others scared, and many felt betrayed. How could something like this happen? Who gave the HOA the authority to meddle with someone else's property without doing basic research? And most importantly, how were they going to survive without water? For the homeowner, the situation was overwhelming. Not only had her property been vandalized, as she saw it, but she was now caught in the middle of a neighborhood-wide crisis. People looked to her for answers, even though she was just as clueless as everyone else. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers, insurance agents, and city officials trying to figure out what steps to take next. Meanwhile, reporters showed up, eager to cover the bizarre story. Camera crews parked outside her house, and journalists knocked on doors, asking for interviews. Despite the stress, the homeowner refused to let herself fall apart. She knew she had to stay strong, not just for herself, but for her kids and for the rest of the community. As the days went on, she found herself stepping into a leadership role almost by accident. When tempers flared during impromptu neighborhood meetings, she was the one who stepped in to calm things down. When misinformation spread, she worked tirelessly to set the record straight. Slowly but surely, she became the glue holding everyone together. But the challenges kept piling up. Without water, life ground to a halt. Families hauled jugs from nearby towns, lining up at grocery stores and gas stations to stockpile bottles. Kids complained about not being able to take baths, and parents scrambled to keep them entertained while schools canceled classes due to lack of plumbing. Restaurants closed their doors, and businesses suffered losses. The once peaceful neighborhood now resembled a war zone, with makeshift solutions cropping up everywhere. Portable tanks were brought in as a temporary fix, but they were far from ideal. Long lines formed every morning as people waited their turn to fill buckets and containers. Arguments broke out over whose turn it was, and patience wore thin. The sight of children carrying heavy jugs of water home tugged at heartstrings, reminding everyone of how fragile modern conveniences really are. Amid all the chaos, one thing became painfully obvious. The HOA's reckless decision-making had caused more than just physical damage. It had shattered trust within the community. Neighbors who had once been friendly now eyed each other suspiciously, wondering who had known what and when. Accusations flew back and forth, and tension simmered beneath the surface. Yet, amidst the anger and frustration, there were also moments of humanity. Strangers offered to share their limited supplies. Elderly residents received help from younger neighbors hauling water to their homes. People banded together to create makeshift filtration systems using whatever materials they could find. These small acts of kindness reminded everyone that, despite everything, they were still a community, and communities stick together, even in the toughest times. As the week dragged on, the homeowner found herself reflecting on the absurdity of it all. Just days ago, her biggest worry had been keeping her unruly yard in check. Now, she was at the center of a crisis that had turned her quiet suburban neighborhood upside down. It was surreal, infuriating, and exhausting, but somehow, she couldn't help feeling a spark of determination ignite within her. This wasn't just about fixing a water tank anymore. It was about holding those responsible accountable and making sure something like this never happened again. Little did she know, the fight was only beginning. By Thursday, the neighborhood was a powder keg of emotions. Frustration had turned into outright anger, and it didn't take long for people to start pointing fingers. The HOA, once seen as the well-meaning, if overly strict enforcers of community rules, was now public enemy number one. Whispers grew louder at every corner, on sidewalks, in driveways, and even during emergency water pickups. How could they do this? Became the question on everyone's lips. The homeowner at 42 Maple Lane found herself at the center of it all. People looked to her not just because her property was ground zero for the disaster, but also because she seemed to have a clear head. When so many others were losing theirs, she wasn't perfect, far from it. She was stressed, overwhelmed, and still reeling from the shock of coming home to find her backyard transformed into a concrete nightmare. But somehow, she managed to channel her frustration into action. She started organizing meetings with her neighbors, gathering everyone in the small community center that usually hosted bingo nights and holiday parties. At first, attendance was sparse. Some folks were too busy hauling water or dealing with their own problems to show up. But as word spread about what she was trying to do, more and more people began showing up. By Friday evening, the room was packed, buzzing with voices eager to vent their grievances. One man stood up, holding an empty water jug. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, waving the container like a protest sign. "We're living in the 21st century, not some third world country. How are we supposed to live without water?" His words struck a chord, and nods rippled through the crowd. A woman chimed in next, tears streaming down her face. "I can't even give my baby a bath," she said softly, clutching a towel. "What am I supposed to do?" The mood shifted back and forth between outrage and despair. But one thing was clear. Everyone wanted answers and justice. That's when the homeowner stepped forward. She'd spent hours on the phone with lawyers, researching legal options and drafting petitions. Now standing before her neighbors, she laid out a plan. "We need to hold the HOA accountable," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "They made this mess and they need to fix it." Her proposal was met with cheers, though not everyone agreed on the details. Some wanted to demand resignations from the entire HOA board. Others pushed for lawsuits against both the HOA and the contractors who had poured the concrete. Tempers flared again, but the homeowner kept things focused. She reminded everyone that fighting amongst themselves wouldn't solve anything. "If we want results, we need to stick together," she said. "United, we're stronger than any HOA." With newfound resolve, the group decided to file a class action lawsuit. They hired a sharp-witted attorney known for tackling tough property disputes. The lawyer wasted no time getting to work, drafting documents and sending formal letters to the HOA and the contractors. Meanwhile, the homeowner continued rallying support, going door to door to collect signatures for petitions demanding transparency and accountability. But while the legal battle got underway, life in the neighborhood remained far from normal. Without running water, routines were completely disrupted. Families adapted as best they could, finding creative ways to cope. One elderly couple set up a system of buckets and funnels to catch rainwater for washing dishes. A young father rigged a solar-powered pump to draw water from a nearby stream. Kids helped carry jugs from portable tanks, turning the chore into a game to keep spirits high. Despite these efforts, tension simmered beneath the surface. Not everyone was pulling in the same direction. Some neighbors accused others of hoarding water, leading to heated arguments. Others blamed the homeowner herself, claiming she should have spoken up sooner about the tank's importance. "Why didn't you tell anyone it was the water supply?" one man snapped during a meeting. The accusation stung, but she didn't lash out. Instead, she calmly explained that she'd assumed everyone already knew. After all, the tank had been there for decades. It was part of the neighborhood's infrastructure long before most of them had moved in. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to show. Marriages were tested, friendships strained, and patience wore thin. Yet, amid the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. Neighbors who barely spoke before now found themselves working side by side to survive. A teenager offered to babysit for a single mom struggling to juggle childcare and water runs. A retired plumber volunteered his skills to help patch leaky pipes in several homes. Even the local grocery store owner stepped up, donating cases of bottled water to families in need. City officials eventually intervened, recognizing the severity of the situation. Engineers arrived to assess the damage and propose solutions. Drilling new wells was suggested, but it would take months and cost millions. Rerouting municipal pipelines was another option, though equally expensive and time-consuming. In the meantime, tanker trucks made daily deliveries, ensuring residents had access to clean water. It wasn't ideal, but it kept everyone afloat. crisis brought the community closer in unexpected ways. People who had lived side by side for years without ever exchanging more than a polite nod now shared meals and stories around makeshift fire pits. Conversations went deeper than complaints about weeds or parking spots. They touched on fears, dreams, and the shared desire for a better future. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like a real community, not just a collection of houses. Still, the shadow of the HOA loomed large. Board members avoided eye contact at meetings, their usual air of authority replaced by shame and defensiveness. Several resigned under pressure, leaving behind a leadership vacuum. Those who stayed promised reforms, vowing to listen more and act less impulsively. Whether anyone believed them was another story. Through it all, the homeowner remained a steady presence. She attended every meeting, answered countless questions, and fielded angry calls late into the night. Her determination inspired others to step up too. A stay-at-home dad started a Facebook group to share updates and organize volunteer efforts. A retired teacher began teaching free yoga classes in the park to help people manage stress. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to rebuild not just its water system, but its spirit. Of course, none of this erased the pain of what had happened. The memory of dry taps and endless lines would linger for years. But in the midst of adversity, something remarkable emerged: resilience. People learned to lean on each other, to adapt, and to fight for what mattered most. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: they weren't going to let a mistake define them. Instead, they were determined to rise above it together. As the days stretched into weeks, the neighborhood settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Life without running water was far from normal, but people adapted in ways that were both creative and heartbreaking. The once pristine streets now looked like a patchwork of survival efforts. Portable tanks lined driveways, buckets sat stacked by front doors, and makeshift contraptions for collecting rainwater dotted backyards. It wasn't pretty, but it worked for now. City officials scrambled to find temporary fixes while engineers hashed out long-term solutions. Tanker trucks became a daily sight, rumbling through the neighborhood at dawn to deliver fresh water. Residents queued up with jugs, barrels, and even repurposed soda bottles, forming lines that snaked down sidewalks. Kids played tag between waiting adults, turning what could have been a grim chore into something almost fun. But beneath the surface, frustration simmered. Waiting hours for water wasn't sustainable, and everyone knew it. One morning, an elderly woman collapsed while carrying 2 heavy jugs back to her house. Neighbors rushed to help, lifting the containers and guiding her inside. That incident sparked a wave of concern about the toll this crisis was taking on vulnerable residents. A few days later, a group of teenagers organized a water brigade, offering to haul jugs for older folks and anyone else who needed assistance. They called themselves the Tank Troopers and wore mismatched t-shirts spray-painted with the words, "We've got your back." Their energy brought a much-needed sense of hope to the community. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, negotiations over the lawsuit intensified. Lawyers representing the affected homeowners, the HOA, and the contractors met repeatedly, hashing out terms in tense meetings that often stretched late into the night. Settlement talks dragged on, with each side pointing fingers and refusing to budge. The HOA argued they had acted in good faith, claiming ignorance about the tank's purpose. The contractors insisted they were simply following orders. And the homeowners? They wanted accountability and compensation. The homeowner at 42 Maple Lane found herself in the thick of it all. She attended every meeting, sitting alongside her attorney as they pressed their case. Her voice rarely rose above a calm tone, but her determination never wavered. When the HOA tried to shift blame onto the contractors, she cut them off mid-sentence. "This isn't about passing the buck," she said firmly. "It's about fixing what you broke." Her words resonated not just with her lawyer, but also with the growing number of neighbors who supported her cause. Back in the neighborhood, tempers flared as rumors spread about secret deals being made behind the scenes. Some accused the HOA of trying to settle quietly to avoid bad press. Others worried the contractors would declare bankruptcy, leaving taxpayers to foot the bill for repairs. Amidst the uncertainty, trust eroded further. People stopped attending HOA meetings altogether, dismissing them as pointless exercises in finger-pointing. But not everything was bleak. In fact, the crisis revealed unexpected strengths within the community. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now relied on each other in profound ways. One man rigged up a filtration system using materials from his garage, offering free access to anyone who needed clean water for cooking or drinking. Another family turned their backyard into a communal washing station where people could scrub clothes and dishes using water pumped from a nearby stream. These small acts of kindness reminded everyone that, despite the chaos, they weren't alone. Even local businesses pitched in. The grocery store owner set aside cases of bottled water for families struggling to make ends meet. A mechanic offered discounted services to anyone whose car broke down while hauling water jugs. And the coffee shop stayed open, brewing cups of instant coffee with boiled water donated by customers. These gestures may have seemed minor, but they added up, creating a web of support that helped keep spirits alive. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Parents wrestled with guilt over sending kids to school smelling less than fresh because showers were a luxury. Couples argued over whose turn it was to lug water home after long workdays. Even pets suffered, with some dogs refusing to drink the murky water fetched from streams. The stress seeped into every corner of life, testing relationships and patience. Through it all, the homeowner continued to lead by example. She didn't sugarcoat the situation. She acknowledged how hard things were and encouraged others to lean on each other. At one particularly heated neighborhood meeting, she stood up and addressed the crowd. "I know we're tired," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I know we're angry. But let's not lose sight of why we're fighting. This isn't just about water, it's about fairness. About making sure no one gets away with trampling over us again." Her words struck a chord, sparking applause and renewed determination. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Engineers presented plans for a new reservoir system, though funding remained a sticking point. City council members debated allocating emergency funds, while petitions circulated urging state officials to step in. The battle wasn't over, but progress was finally visible on the horizon. Behind the scenes, the legal team secured a breakthrough. After weeks of deadlock, the HOA agreed to shoulder a significant portion of the repair costs. The contractors, eager to avoid further backlash, pledged to cover the rest. While the settlement fell short of full reimbursement for the damages, it marked a crucial step toward rebuilding not just the water system, but trust within the community. As news of the agreement spread, relief washed over the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, people allowed themselves to imagine a future where taps flowed freely and life returned to normal. Kids dreamed of bubble baths, parents fantasized about laundry machines humming again, and gardeners envisioned lush lawns revived by sprinklers. Yet, the scars of the crisis lingered. No amount of money could erase the memories of dry faucets or endless lines for water. Trust in the HOA remained fragile, and many vowed never to let such negligence happen again. But amidst the pain, there was growth. People learned to rely on each other, to speak up when something felt wrong, and to fight for what mattered most. For the homeowner at 42 Maple Lane, the experience changed her in ways she never expected. Once hesitant to confront authority, she discovered a strength she didn't know she had. Her leadership inspired others to step up, proving that even ordinary individuals can spark meaningful change when faced with extraordinary challenges. As the neighborhood began to heal, she realized something important. Resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about coming out stronger on the other side. Months had passed since the water crisis first erupted, and though life in the neighborhood was slowly returning to normal, the scars of the ordeal remained. The once barren reservoir tank at 42 Maple Lane had been dismantled, its concrete tomb now a distant memory. In its place stood a gleaming new system, modern, efficient, and designed to last for decades. Engineers worked tirelessly to ensure it would never fail again, installing backup pumps and advanced monitoring systems to prevent future disasters. But as much as the physical infrastructure had been rebuilt, the emotional recovery took longer. Settlement agreement between the homeowners, the HOA, and the contractors finally came through. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to cover most of the repair costs and provide some compensation for the inconvenience endured by families. The HOA agreed to fund upgrades not just to the water system, but also to other aging parts of the neighborhood's infrastructure. They even set aside money for community projects, a small park near the entrance, better lighting along dark streets, and a revamped playground for kids. Some saw these gestures as genuine efforts to make amends. Others dismissed them as too little, too late. Either way, the changes signaled a shift toward transparency and accountability that hadn't existed before. Several HOA board members resigned under pressure, paving the way for fresh leadership. Those who stepped up were younger, more approachable, and committed to listening rather than dictating. Monthly meetings became open forums where neighbors could voice concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, especially when old grievances resurfaced, but people were willing to give the new leadership a chance. For the homeowner at 42 Maple Lane, the experience marked a turning point. She went from being an ordinary resident trying to keep her head above water, literally and figuratively, to becoming a symbol of resilience and courage. Her determination to hold those responsible accountable inspired others to speak up about issues they'd previously ignored. Whether it was demanding safer crosswalks for schoolchildren or advocating for better waste management, residents found their voices and used them. Her newfound confidence didn't stop there. After months of navigating legal battles and rallying support, she decided to get more involved in local governance. She joined a committee focused on improving community services, using her experience to push for policies aimed at preventing similar crises in the future. If we don't learn from this, then what was the point? She often said during meetings. Her passion rubbed off on others, sparking a wave of civic engagement that transformed the neighborhood. As the new water system went online, cheers erupted throughout the community. For the first time in months, taps flowed freely, showers ran hot, and dishwashers hummed with satisfaction. Kids splashed in sprinklers on sunny afternoons, and parents breathed sighs of relief knowing they could finally wash clothes without hauling jugs to laundromats miles away. Restaurants reopened their doors, welcoming customers back with menus full of gratitude. Even the local coffee shop introduced a special drink called Reservoir Revival Blend, donating proceeds to charity in honor of the ordeal. But while life returned to its predictable rhythm, memories of the crisis lingered. Conversations around dinner tables often drifted back to those chaotic days, the endless lines for water, the makeshift solutions, and the shared struggles that brought everyone closer together. People joked about how they'd learned to appreciate simple luxuries like flushing toilets and morning showers. Yet beneath the humor lay a deeper appreciation for the fragility of modern conveniences and the importance of looking out for one another. The crisis also left behind a legacy of kindness. Neighbors who had barely known each other before now greeted each other warmly. Families swapped recipes during potluck dinners held in driveways. Kids teamed up to build treehouses in backyards, forging friendships that might never have happened otherwise. The sense of isolation that sometimes comes with suburban living gave way to a stronger sense of connection. People realized that no matter how nice your house is or how manicured your lawn looks, real wealth lies in relationships, not rules. Even the HOA underwent a transformation. Gone were the days of nitpicking over paint colors or sending threatening letters about overgrown lawns. The new board focused on fostering unity instead of enforcing conformity. They organized block parties, holiday parades, and volunteer cleanup days. When conflicts arose, they addressed them with empathy rather than rigid authority. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but progress was undeniable. For the homeowner at the center of it all, the journey was bittersweet. She felt proud of what the community had achieved, yet she couldn't forget the hardships they'd endured. Sitting on her porch one evening, watching kids play tag under the fading sunlight, she reflected on how much had changed. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was better, stronger, more resilient. She smiled as a neighbor waved from across the street, carrying a tray of homemade cookies. "For you and the kids," he said, setting them down on her porch railing. "Just a little thank you for everything." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment she struggled to respond. Finally, she nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "We did it together," she replied softly. "All of us." And that was the truth. What started as a catastrophic mistake turned into a lesson in humanity. The neighborhood had faced its darkest hour, but instead of falling apart, it came together. Bonds formed in adversity proved stronger than any rulebook or policy ever could. And though the story of the concrete-filled reservoir would forever be etched in collective memory, it wouldn't be remembered as a failure, it would be remembered as a triumph. A testament to the power of resilience, unity, and hope. As night fell, the sound of laughter echoed through the streets, a reminder that even in the toughest times, light can shine through. And in that quiet suburban corner of the world, life carried on, richer and fuller than before.